Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trubergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is a storyteller's perspective piece. A snake dressed in pretty clothes is still a snake. It started with what I fully admit was far from one of my finer moments on the Substack platform as a whole. A note that I tossed together in a fit of pique, filled with momentary anger, disgust, and indignation. If I had done what I usually do when I'm feeling that way toward a particular person, nothing would have come of it, and all things would have just gone on as usual. Why? Because most of the time, I sit back, take a moment to recognize that nothing I say about the individual pissing me off is going to affect any kind of change, due to my standing as a relative nobody in damned near every arena of life, especially in the online realms, and opt to just keep my thoughts to myself. Well, this time I allowed myself to type out a profanity-laced screed of invective against a particular Substack outfit and their Grand High Poobah, specifically pointing out that said Poobah is a disingenuous bad-faith actor of the highest order, one who likes to cloak himself in the trappings of being a, quote, soldier for Christendom, unquote, when all he really appears to be, upon closer inspection, is a wannabe tyrant browbeating everyone in the pop culture spaces of video games, comic books, and genre fiction if they don't kowtow to his specific understanding and interpretations of biblical scripture and parables. Oh, and this individual likes to try and line his pockets with the funds of anyone willing to bow and scrape to his poorly written drivel in the name of the Lord, of course. The point that I'm circuitously meandering toward here, ladies and gentlemen, is that I have not historically engaged in the sort of internet blood sports that are common, even though I have been sorely tempted to in the past. But each and every time that I've been tempted previously, even momentarily, I've usually ended up walking away with the understanding that these folks who annoyed me were not only many times more notable on the whole and had a great deal of backing, but for the most part, what they were getting up to had little or nothing to do with me on a personal level. Enter Jon Del Arroz via Fandom Pulse. There's a fairly close-knit pop culture community that I've been tangentially attached to for about the last 6 or 7 months on YouTube, Rumble, and other online spaces, such as Discord. And near the time I started watching videos and streams from some of the more prominent folks in this particular space, they started making mention of Jon Del Arroz, JDA. Now, I had already been made familiar with him on a surface level, largely thanks to having been an early adopter of the Substack platform. I've been on there for 4 years. Initially, I was inclined to think well of the guy. He was a genre fiction wonk, much like myself, largely in sci-fi and fantasy, and he was trying to break into the comic books graphic novel scene. I can't draw for shite myself, but any artistic endeavor, taken up with authenticity, is worthy of a kudos as far as I'm concerned, and at the time, he seemed genuine, at first blush. But it didn't take long to see that his sci-fi graphic novel materials were looking like a blatant ripoff of Warhammer 40k aesthetics with a coat of Christianity paint slapped over top. Actually reading some of JDA's early work also made it clear that, despite all of his online harping about the, quote, woke leftists attempting to cancel him for being a conservative and a Christian, he wasn't always a good little soldier for God. It's also clear from reading and reviewing one of his novels that the man has all the storytelling talent of a brain-damaged chimpanzee with one arm permanently stapled to its own forehead. He seemed to be, if one looked long and hard enough, little more than a socio-political chameleon and huckster, willing to shift his stances and perspectives with the winds of the day, in order to best try to sell his subpar artistic products. And now that there's actually been some movement in the video games section of popular culture as a whole against the fringe leftist loons who have been attempting to use video games as yet another means of smuggling their ideology into every avenue of entertainment and information conveyance available in the Western world. Rather than taking a moment to enjoy the small victories and pushback that moderates and conservatives have been gaining ground with over the last couple of years, JDA and several other folks of a similar ideological framework to his own have decided that now is their time to shine. You see, what his crowd of eager zealots, no zealot like a convert, as was often said of Paul the Apostle, appear to have misunderstood is that a lot of folks who have been speaking out against the, quote, tolerant left and their ideology and degenerate behaviors infecting everything they touch like a cancer, insisting that everyone who isn't among their cult membership rules bow down and accept their worldview and adopt it as their own, were speaking out against because being browbeaten and demanded fealty from in the name of any ideology. Any. That includes yours, Mr. Del Arroz. Don't get me wrong here now. I'm no fan of these sanity-scouring methods and notions held by the citizens of that realm known as woke Tardistan, whose flag emblem appears to be a prolapsed anus covered in monkeypox sores and rainbow spray paint, and who are curiously defensive toward Muslims, whose faith demands that they execute the very same mostly Western dipshits who defend them. No, I'm not a fan of them. And though I imagine JDA would question my bona fides as a Christian man, which he has every right to do, I would merely point out that I have clarified on numerous occasions that I cannot claim to be a good Christian. I fall short in ways more plentiful than should be expected for an Irish American born and raised in Buffalo, New York, a heavily Catholic area. But there's also another keen difference between my application of faith and JDA and his companies. I hold myself responsible to my understanding of Christ's teachings, where JDA and his pals want to hold everybody else responsible and answerable to their understanding of Scripture. This is just intended to be a touching upon my distaste for Mr. Del Arroz and his smug self-righteousness, primarily sparked by his underhanded tactics in interacting with Smash JT and others who find JDA deserving of pushback against his pompous mannerisms. As I write this, it has been a few hours since a rather lengthy exchange between myself and him, and himself and quite a sizable number of folks from a Discord server, which he joined by following an open and available public link attached to a YouTube live stream program. The exchanges were far from friendly or cordial, and though he would likely endeavor to claim that he was friendly and polite throughout the entirety of that span of dialogue, he most certainly was not. He proved himself, in point of fact, on several occasions to be exactly the kind of duplicitous, self-congratulating, and condescending prick that he claims the woke to all be. He even deployed one of those folks' favorite tactics, the veiled insult by means of friendly gesture, implying that he was putting together a reading list for Smash JT for, quote, his education and edification, clearly implying that the gentleman in question, Smash, either hadn't already been familiarized with such material, or that he would need to do that required reading in order to be on JDA's level, as it were. This was not an exact quote, but rather the clear implication for those familiar with such condescending and smug dialectic tactics. What brought this all on? For background context, to understand why exactly I finally had enough of JDA's nonsense and opted to snarl openly at him on Substack, one needs only go to JDA's YouTube channel and watch a replay of his live stream conversation with Smash JT just a few days ago. It was the last of April or 1st of May. I can't recall right now which day exactly it was. The conversation was rather impromptu between the two. It wasn't planned out well in advance, and it was hosted on JDA's channel, to which Smash JT accepted an invite for a live chat regarding developments and events in the video games hobby and industry, and their differing takes and perspectives thereupon. In the first couple of minutes of the live conversation, JDA claimed he had an incoming call, which turned out to be from a man who has labeled himself Vox Dei, a less than clever play on the Latin expression Vox Dei, which means the voice of God. This fellow is the publisher for JDA and Razor Fist's graphic novels, from what I can gather, though we'll leave aside Razor Fist for now, despite the fact that he seems to be yet another member of the growing cadre of self-righteous, moralizing busybodies who have decided to resurrect and play hosts to the spirit of the Reaganite Bush Sr. moral majority that made the popular culture its whipping boy back in the late 70s and 80s in the Western world. Sidebar, Razor Fist. I've seen only a handful of Razor Fist videos over the years, and I've usually found the man relatively entertaining. This makes it more as the shame that it would appear he's opted to engage in the same holier-than-thou attitude that makes JDA so revolting. It's also rather jarring, given that Razor Fist looks less like a holy roller and more like Andrew Dice Clay if the comedian had stopped aging around 35 years old and developed AIDS rather than type 2 diabetes. Well, the Dice Man, or a flesh-and-blood incarnation of the player character from the original release of the game Postal in concept art, take your pick. That tangent now aside, back to that livestream with JDA and Smash JT, and the inclusion of Vox Day. Mr. Del Arroz explained to Smash that Day is his usual co-host for his live streams, and asked if Smash would be amenable to having this third person join their call. To be frank about it, Smash should have said, no, you agreed to have a one-on-one conversation, you and I, and that's it. Tell Mr. Day that while he's used to coming on and co-hosting this stream, you have a special set of circumstances and he needs to hold his peace. But Smash JT is willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, to be charitable in his presumptions of their motives. It didn't take long for everyone to see exactly why Mr. Del Arroz wanted his publisher buddy to hop on the stream. Every time Smash started to bring up a salient point or rebuttal to something that came oozing out of JDA's sanctimonious mouth, Mr. Day would start droning over Smash, cutting him off and disrupting the flow of the dialogue, guiding the conversation off of Smash's track. Several times, Mr. Day ended up going on tangents that had almost nothing to do with the core points of contention between Smash and JDA, but were examples of bloviating self-aggrandizement regarding his history in the publishing realm. In classical medieval terms, JDA brought Vox in to be his palm dagger, an easily concealed weapon usually viewed as dishonorable in its deployment in combat, particularly when the edge was laced with toxins. Watching the conversation became an exercise in frustration after only a few minutes, because rather than actually confront and respond to the issues that Smash took with JDA's coverage of events in the games industry, or JDA and company's constant insistence that their worldview and ideology should be infused into all entertainment, as opposed to the fringe left wokey ideology that we are only recently finally getting out of there in small steps, JDA and Vox Day instead deflected, gish-galloped, and redirected the conversation in every way they could, avoiding the actual substance of Smash's observations. When the subject of JDA's potential anti-Semitic commentary toward another pop culture commentator and investigative journalist, master of the TDS, was raised by Smash JT, Smash asked if it might be appropriate for Mr. Del Arroz to issue any sort of apology to said fellow, since TDS is of Jewish descent and faith. Mr. Del Arroz's scoffing dismissal of the very idea was followed up by his own demand that Smash make an apology for a fact error that he had made in the publication of one of his own website articles. Much to my own frustration and that of many of us who were watching that stream, Smash went ahead and made the apology on his end, even though JDA's request for apology relied upon a false equivalency. You see, Mr. Arroz was being asked to apologize for shitty personal behavior and denigrating a fellow content creator based on that fellow's ethnic and faith background, where Smash was being demanded to apologize for making an error of factual reporting. These things are not the same. They are not equivalent, as one is motivated by a callous, smug sense of superiority on JDA's part, where the other was an honest mistake predicated upon not having up-to-date and wholly accurate information to work off of in the case of Smash. This is why I say JDA is a bad faith figure of the highest order, and it's the sort of thing that the moral majority dipshits from the 1980s and 1990s were keen on when dealing with anyone who gave them pushback. It is a dishonest way of dealing with people. A hard pill to swallow. My own personal frustration with Jon Del Arroz and the folks he works with over at the Fandom Pulse stems largely, I will admit openly and freely, from the fact that, in several ways, and as accurately observed by Mr. Del Arroz himself, in the Discord interactions read from on Toasty with the Mosty 69's live stream on May 2nd, I share a similar perspective to theirs in terms of popular culture and media. I'm not as sociopolitically to the right as they are, though that would be difficult to match since I'm not Attila the Hun. Seriously, JDA claims he only, quote, attacks the left, but his framework for who is on the left seems to be about as demented as Sam Cedar's view of who is to the right of him. I'm also not prone to being a sermonizing, self-righteous cunt as they are, either. Though I am making an exception with this piece, obviously. Jon Del Arroz is sort of like the fictional character of John Walker in that way, the man who was brought in to be the, quote, new Captain America in the program Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This is about the time where even making this comparison will undoubtedly make JDA and his pals feel the urge to decry, "Oh, you swallowed the woke Disney Marvel programming. You're a leftist. You must be if you watch that." First of all, calm your tits, fellas. A person can view or read or listen to demonstrably piss-poor material and still glean something valuable from it. That's called reading comprehension skills. It's also referred to as interpretation, which your crowd is awfully fond of utilizing when quoting cherry-picked passages of scripture in order to browbeat people. So let's not do the whole pot meat kettle thing, eh? John Walker, in his character arc, ultimately gets stripped of the title of Captain America and the mission of being said person after he uses the iconic vibranium shield to kill one of the story's antagonists, a super soldier anarchistic thug who, let's be honest, would not have hesitated to kill him if given half a chance. After being cast aside, Walker forges his own version of Cap's legendary shield, making it out of more mundane materials than the vibranium that plays a crucial mythological role in the legendarium of Marvel as a whole. He also dons a black suit that, while similar to Cap's costume, is darker in hue and affect. That's what JDA has done with Christianity, you see. He has made of it a cheap approximation, one that looks like fellowship upon first glance, that seems like it should hold up under the pressures of being struck against. The problem for JDA, however, is that unlike the fictional Walker, Del Arroz doesn't appear to be genuinely interested in helping anyone but himself, and demanding fealty from those around him because he comes draped in the trappings of Christendom. Where Walker was authentically trying to help people to serve the essence of Cap's mission and spirit, Del Arroz's efforts appear to lack any understanding of scriptural instruction beyond gays are bad. The Westboro Baptist Church would have loved to have this guy on side when they were still relevant. I wouldn't normally question someone's faith or manner of extolling the virtues of Christ's teachings like this, but let's also take a moment to hold up an example of precisely why the way in which JDA conducts himself with people is anathema to the actual pursuit of offering fellowship. In the previously referenced Discord exchange, there was a fellow who goes by the tag Furious Dan 45, who outright said that if Del Arroz's notion of Christianity and its promotion to the public was the primary one out there, then Dan would prefer to just proclaim himself an out-and-out atheist. You see, this is what is often referred to as blowback in the realm of sociopolitics, a phenomenon wherein a people decides that they are perfectly willing to finally get on board with absolute extremists in their society in retaliatory response to the abuses leveled against them by outside forces. Scott Horton has written dozens of brilliant articles on the subject, even an entire book about it regarding the uprising of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Middle East. In more personal, human-to-human relations, it often presents as personal rebellion and opposition. If Mr. Del Arroz and company were a little more familiar with human psychology or history and human events, they might realize that they were pushing people away from fellowship with their approach, and that helps exactly nobody if you actually believe that expanding Christian fellowship is good for humanity as a whole. You see, Mr. Del Arroz, or anyone from your circle who hears or reads or watches this, unlike your presumptions that I am, quote, of the left, or that I am somehow opposed to scriptural teachings and musings, I'm not. I'm not thrilled with the state of the publishing industry, a point you would know if you had taken any bit of time to actually get to know my material. But no, that would require that you actually look into some of my written works or anybody outside of your precious little inner circle, or actually listen to some of my previous live streams or videos and pay attention to what I've said, rather than making assumptions because I push against you. The topics that I've covered, my dissatisfaction with the state of film, television, novels, and comic books, that would have required a genuine, authentic effort on your part, Mr. Del Arroz, to get to know who you're talking to. And you don't seem to be capable of being authentic or genuine about much of anything. That is why people don't care for you. Sure, I don't doubt that some few are demonstrably and overtly, genuinely anti-Christian. However, what excuse will you drape yourself in when another Christian, one who doesn't adhere to your version of fellowship, someone like me, tells you that you're a rancid, duplicitous, bad-faith piece of shit? The artistic Mott and Bailey. This is, at the last, because I've been droning on for far too long already, another factor in what makes JDA and folks in his circle intensely insufferable, and it's a tactic that he deployed once again in the Discord exchange. When I mentioned to him that I had read one of his books, For Steam and Country, which is a steaming pile of garbage, and that I found it to be disastrously bad, he asked what I took exception to within it. I replied that I had put together a full analytical review video on my Rumble channel explaining why I found it to be a terrible piece of work, and I linked him to said review. His response? No thanks, I'd rather not critique your video. That wasn't requested, Mr. Del Arroz, and don't reframe this. You asked what I found unlikable about the work. I provided a link to a full-throated explanation and response to your question, which you had every opportunity to partake of, and you chose rather to just say, nah. Rather than actually go look, you dodged the very existence of negative feedback. You further went on to say effectively that, quote, everyone's tastes are different, which is something that, again, I actually agree with broadly as a sentiment regarding art. Yet, you and yours would insist, and routinely do, that any product of artistic endeavor that doesn't align perfectly with your personal worldview and moral stances is woke and bad. But wait a minute, Mr. Del Arroz. I thought you just said that everyone's tastes are different, right? How is it that you present the argument of art being subjective with regards to your own works, but fail to extend that grace to the works of others? Oh, right, because that helps to try and ensure your profit margins. This is a prime example of an argumentation tactic known as the Mott and Bailey, or in your case, simple double standards, a favorite debate tactic deployed by, oh yeah, the left. That's right, JDA. You're more than happy to deploy the methods and measures of the very same said crowd you claim to hold in such contempt. You don't seem to actually have any principles that you won't bend, so long as it benefits you and your bottom line fiscally or ideologically. That is why you are an insufferable cunt. That's why you get pushback. It's not, as you claim, your mere existence that causes people to dislike you. It's the way you conduct yourself. It's the way you insist that you're so much better than everybody else. Screenshots from the previously referenced Discord discussion are available for any and all who request them, as I have secured permission from that server's owner, problematic white guy, a different John, to share them if necessary. It's sad that a person as broadly irrelevant as I am has to be the one to present this explanation as to why exactly it is that Jon Del Arroz is as repulsive a person as he is. We all know it. We all feel it. The question is, does it change anything? Will it make JDA actually pause and consider what's been said? I don't think so. Because I don't think he's actually capable of deeper self-reflection. I just don't. But what do I know? I'm just a guy. That's all for now. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves. And as always, keep reading.